All right, let's do it. Let's get started. So thanks for joining today. My name is Dirk Ahrens. I'm the president at Virtual Systems. We're a cloud service provider, and this is a webinar about cybersecurity in a remote work world. We are kind of, what are we now, 4 or 5 months settled into this thing, and I think a lot of organizations are starting to think about how does this become more permanent for us, and certainly in IT we're thinking about how do we keep our technology and our data safe if we start to really decentralize our workforce. So at Virtual Systems, we started talking with some other of our peers across the country, really at Vista and LaFleur, and so let's put together some content and see what we can do to just kind of put some thought leadership out there. And so that's what we're going to do today. So I'll intro myself a little bit more, and then we're going to intro the rest of the panelists here who are going to be putting on the webinar, and then we'll give you a high-level overview, and then we'll jump into kind of the content. But we've got a Q&A so in the webinar, so if you've got questions as we go, we hope this is kind of a casual roundtable. So pop in with questions. We'll try to answer some of those on the fly. There is a spot at the end for Q&A, so we'll do some of that then. Also, we are recording the webinar, so if you love it and you want to get out to your friends, because you registered, you'll be on a mailing list afterward, and we'll say, hey, here's the slide deck, here's the recording. If you want to go back through it or give it to any friends, then you'll be able to do that. So again, my name is Dirk Ahrens, and I'm the president at Virtual Systems, and we are a cloud service provider. So all that really means is we build IT solutions for business customers across the country and in Canada. So we're just in North America. But we do that via cloud solutions. So we've got data centers, we use public cloud stuff like AWS. So we're having these conversations all the time with customers, especially over the last few months, about security and how they change things and how we can make things different but stay protected and stay secure. So I'm excited about this topic, and I'm excited about the other people that we've got on it, because I think we got a lot of value to add in this kind of casual format. So we'll go right down the line, Chip, and then Mary Ellen and Terry.
Sure. So I'm the president of LaFleur Marketing. And obviously, marketing company, we've got a different perspective than Dirk does on the technology side. But we quickly made that switch over, when COVID hit, to a remote workplace. And as we did that, I love IT, and so I started to see all of these kind of dangerous points for my organization, for my business, which is not dissimilar to a law firm, in that we use a lot of confidential information. There's a lot of higher risk points, when it comes to data transfer, people moving to their own devices. And so we started to have this conversation with Dirk and with Vista, and talking about, like, how do we reduce this risk? Because to me, making that transition, there's a lot of risk factors there, with your team, but the IT side is one of the biggest. And so, I think Dirk brings this great perspective, the Vista team as well, to kind of merge these two areas to say, how do we protect our business against one of the bigger risk areas? This is something that can come up and bite any organization. So that's kind of our perspective is, we use Virtual Systems for a variety of things. We've had to tighten our security too. So I just wanted to be a part of this conversation from that perspective.
Great. My name is Mary Ellen Murrah. I'm an operations consultant with the Vista Consulting team. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be here today, and especially to talk about this topic that I think is so incredibly timely, especially as many people are transitioning somewhat back into the office, still have team members at home, and are kind of maybe struggling with what that looks like and what they need to be aware of in that environment.
Yes, and I'm Terry Houchin, an operations consultant, also with Vista Consulting. Happy to be with you guys today and with this group to discuss what certainly is a relevant talk and discussion that we'll go through. And Vista Consulting, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what Vista Consulting does, who we are, what we do. We're an operations and strategy consulting firm. We've had the pleasure of working with over 150 plaintiff personal injury law firms here in the United States and in Canada. We are constantly, and our firms are always looking for ways to optimize their operations. So our objective is to help and assist firms in enhancing the efficiency and the effectiveness of their operations. So, with as many law firms as we are in and get the pleasure of working with, we spot trends, we see challenges that they are facing, and with, the transition that we've all gone through over the past several months. While Vista is a virtual company, we ourselves have faced challenges as well, and we've seen, and helped and assisted with the firms make this transition. So we're excited to share, what we've seen, what we're seeing, and just kind of workshop with you guys today on how we can collectively move forward in best practices. So, Dirk?
Yeah, thanks. And I think worth mentioning too, so Vista does a lot with law firms, so does LaFleur, so does Virtual Systems. But I know we've got some people on today who aren't just in the legal industry, and this webinar is content that is really meant for everybody. We're going to talk about some of the nuances in the legal vertical, as well as maybe touch on healthcare and other heavy compliance type of verticals. But really, this is for everybody. So hope you find it useful. So this is, I think we live in crazy times, and we're seeing, I think, a catalyst for some big changes in the way we work. So this stat comes out of Gallup, but just a couple months ago, that said at least 2/3 of us right now are working remote, which I think, months ago at the beginning of the year, we certainly weren't anywhere near that. A couple other stats that came out of that same survey. This one is kind of a weird way to say it, but they surveyed, I think if you follow that link there, a few thousand companies, and half of the companies, or more than half, said that pretty much everybody, or 80% or more of their workforce, was remote. And I think, as I think through our customer base at Virtual Systems, we're definitely seeing that. I think by and large, most of our customers have said at the beginning of this, hey, we're all remote right now. And a lot of that was state related. Most states were saying that, we're enforcing that. But here's where I think it gets really interesting and where we want to take the conversation today. What's happening post-pandemic? So where are we going with the way that we work moving forward? And that is, one of the things that came out of this poll, upwards of 35% are going to keep maybe working remotely. And I saw some other stats that, one, I did a webinar yesterday in healthcare, and one of the stats that came out of the healthcare industry was they said 75% of those surveyed in healthcare were saying, if my employer doesn't come to me and say that, I can continue to work remote, I'm going to ask. That was one of the questions. So I think we're going to see maybe the biggest shift that we've ever seen in remote work. And that's going to beg, I think, a lot of questions on how we keep data safe, how we continue to be compliant, secure. And so, that's kind of our intention today. So here's what we're going to look at. There's really several, we polled at Virtual Systems, we polled several resources and came up with the top 5 security concerns as we're working remote. And so what we're going to do is just kind of talk through those. So you can see them there. We're going to go through them just kind of in dialogue form, but our people are the number one. So it's really employees, and we'll see from the data that that's where a lot of breaches happen. So then we've got to have good password processes and even good passwords, but patch management's another one. How we manage our vendors or the partners that we're working with. I was talking with Terry and Mary Ellen earlier today, and we were just talking about how, your partners, you think about the partners that work with your company, all the businesses that you are tied to that support you, they went through the same thing you did, and with the pandemic and having everybody go remote. And so it's worth bringing them back to the table and saying, hey, how are you guys handling this thing or that thing? Or you guys hold some of our data. What does that mean? Have you changed any of your policies internally? So those types of practices, and then looking finally at just end user devices and thinking about where we're setting our data and where it sits and how to protect that. So I'll put it, as I transition to the next slide, anything, Terry, Mary Ellen, Chip, anything that we didn't address in those first 5 that you've seen with some of either in your organization or some of the clients you're talking to?
I mean, you covered it in talking about like what happens post-COVID, right? But when I look at that, and when I think through that, and as I'm thinking through how we address that, to me, that's a shift in my focus of like, am I going to invest in a technology that's meant to get us through, which I would see as kind of a unfortunate expenditure, like well, I have to do this thing. It's a stopgap, right? And it bridges the gap. It gets us there. But we're not looking at it like that at all. We're looking at it like this. We are changing the way that we work. And so we're looking at systems, and I'm looking at investments in the organization to say, from here on out, we're going to do things this way. You know, and as you point out, like companies and employees are looking to, their expectation is to be able to work remotely. And that's my expectation. We don't have any plans on having people, you know, asking people to come work in the office until probably a year from now. And so to me, those are long-term planning things, you know, and that's I think a big takeaway is make your systems ready for this so that you can support that type of work, because it's not going away anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Chip. And I think a lot of people, you know, if you're smart and if you can look at this as an opportunity, that maybe identified some areas that weren't necessarily shored up in your business. And so when this happened, what did go wrong? What fell apart that we weren't prepared for? And then what can we do looking to the future to say, let's make sure that that doesn't happen again. Let's make sure that we get the foundation built up, we get our processes and procedures built up, we get our systems built up so that, you know, work in the future is maybe never going back to the same exact way it was before. So let's be prepped for what is next to come.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just in checks and balances, you know, like you said, we kind of all rushed to get set up and transition. And now that, if you will, we've taken a breath, what are those partners that we've partnered with, and what does that look like? You know, again, you know, Vista was a virtual company before, but there were some challenges that we faced when all of this happened. You know, free conference lines were just clogged up with everybody using that service. So we had to, you know, transition to another one. Well, you know, in the moment, it kind of hit us all at different times. So maybe we had multiple subscriptions where we're now looking back and saying, you know, do we need to consolidate some of this? And so that's really the checks and balances that, you know, we're talking about is where are we at, you know, where can we be, you know, more efficient and look at this and, you know, look at our new workflow tools and then, you know, get those procedures in place and what is our plan moving forward. And it can be in phases too, because we're, you know, seeing some things happen where, you know, this is where we're at, but be, you know, open-minded that it could certainly change, you know, next week. So we just need to be open-minded to that, but certainly get something in place to start working off of toward what it's going to look like in, you know, in a year to come and in years to come.
Yeah, it feels like we're in this like pivot point where we've been in remote work long enough to say, okay, this feels like it's going to be like the thing, and I think a lot of organizations didn't consider it as much of, you know, the possible future as they should have or could have, and now, you know, it is. So let's sit and reevaluate. So I'm going to show you this thing. I'm going to move off the deck a minute. Can you see this now? I switched shares. So this is cool. If you've never seen Verizon's data breach incident report, they put it out every year, or investigations report, sorry. They put it out every year, and they're pretty well known for putting this report together. It's a really cool document. So they looked at over 32,000 incidents, and out of those incidents, they determined almost 4,000 security breaches. They don't name names, but they come up with this really cool summary, and they say, all the breaches that we saw last year, here's some of the trends that we are finding. So you can see kind of a summary. They've got these key takeaways. I appreciate kind of what they do from a marketing perspective because it's very readable. It's not boring, even though it's just chock full of data. And you can even look by industry. So I did this on the healthcare webinar yesterday too, but you can just click right into an industry. We'll pick education because I'm thinking about what I'm doing for school next year with my kids. And you can see kind of how they summarize in that, in education, what kind of breaches did we see, what patterns did we see, who was stealing data. So very cool. If you've never seen it, I would encourage you, if you're in a position of thinking about technology for your organization, to grab that document this year and take a look at it, because I think it is super valuable. It's got some, I think, fun information, but also very, let's say, actionable information.
Cool.
So a couple things we summarized here that came out of there. Sorry, Chip, were you going to say something right there?
No, that data is awesome. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a really, I think it's a really interesting document. But you know, one of the things they say, you're at about a 30% chance of a data breach, and if you hang around information security officers at all, they will just say the mantra that I hear a lot is assume breach. Just assume that it's going to happen, and then prepare, put your systems in place, your processes in place, because I think we're at that point where if you've never had a data incident, you will. And I think, you know, it's best to just kind of be prepared for that. So the numbers in this next stat are less important. I mean, you know, the cost of a data breach has increased. I think that is probably, that's the takeaway there. But, you know, it really depends on your business, right? I mean, you could be an $8 million a year business, so your breach, maybe it does cost you $8 million, who knows? But so here's some other takeaways. The biggest thing is human error. So the biggest reason that companies are losing data is because people are making a mistake. And, you know, another takeaway here, the stat is over 300 new phishing campaigns. If you don't know what phishing is, hopefully you do by the end of this webinar, but there are hacking groups out there. We'll call them black hat, or really the bad guys or bad actors, whatever you want to call them. And they are targeting industries. They're doing it with email campaigns just like a marketing company would, and they're just waiting for people to click, and they're trying to figure out what your patterns of behavior are, and when you do, you download stuff. So phishing is, so here's the challenge. It's people, and the answer we're going to kind of uncover here in a minute, but it's really training. So think in terms, as we go through some of this content, how do we just educate all of our people who have our data as a business? How do we educate them on do not click on stuff? You know, watch out for things. Just because it looks interesting, you know, don't click on it. So one of the things that came out of here, 24% of breaches were just solely due to human error, and half of them were malicious, which means the other half were just accidental. But that doesn't mean that they're any better. You're still losing data. So so here's how we kind of tackle that with, there's great training programs out there. So this slide just kind of mentions a couple. So Sophos, Rapid7, at Virtual Systems, we partner with an organization called KnowBe4. It's literally a few bucks a month per employee. But it doesn't matter what you do. I don't want this to be a salesy webinar. The idea is train your employees, even if it's in a team meeting. Designate somebody to rattle off some statistics and tell everyone not to click emails unless they are 100% sure that they know what they're clicking. So I'll defer to anybody else. I feel like I'm talking a lot there. Does anybody have any? I don't know if you got any stories or any other interesting tidbits on just how to train employees and watch out.
Some of these stories on our client side, and won't name names, but like, just falling for phishing campaigns, right? Like somebody in the office falls for a phishing campaign. We've got a client who fell for that, and I know who did it. And next thing, they're on a ransomware. They had a backup solution. The backup solution would only cover up to like 256 characters in their directory structure, and the rest of the data was gone. There was no way to recover that. So they got most of their stuff back, but 2 years later, they're still looking for some resources that they didn't have before. So when you talk about that cost to these things, it's easy to look at something and think of it a little bit abstractly of, a breach, like, okay, somebody got in, but what did they get out with? And what risk are you holding now? I always think of, in our business, like I'm always looking out for like the next big cannonball to drop, right? Like, what is this high risk thing that could really do damage to the business? And this is one of the big ones. So the ransomware thing was one. Another was a blast email that came out from one of the partners to everybody in their address book, trying to get them to wire money. And how many times, they only have to be successful once, right? So thinking about this in terms of the stats is great, but also the real harm, it's a nightmare.
It is, and I think that's a really good point. Yeah, you know, the worst breaches are not the ones that you realize happen right away where, oh, I gave my banking information to somebody. Wait, you didn't ask for that? That's not the worst one. The worst one is when you don't know. And there was one, I'm going to reference that healthcare one again, and there was Microsoft actually put out a big notice and said, hey, there's a, you know, WHO email. It looks like it's coming from Johns Hopkins University. Don't click on anything in it. And what it was a malicious phishing attack, and people it was about COVID data. You know, so it said, hey, here's the COVID data related to your area. And you would open up the Excel document and there's data in there.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't know. You think, oh, well, that was kind of interesting, and you close it up, and maybe you tell your friends about it. But what happened was malware was downloaded that was mining those computers that was downloaded on for data, and you know, huge breach. One of the stats that gets thrown around in IT is it's somewhere between 3 and 4 months on the average timeline between the time you got breached and you know you got breached. That is a long time for anybody to be in your environment. So. We're going to jump into the next one. Anybody else got anything before we do?
I just wanted to make a quick comment on your slide beforehand. You know, it said at the top, proactive employee training. I think that's the solution to so many things in a business, not just this, you know, data breach, but making sure that the team members that you have know what to expect, know what to do. And there's I mean, we could go on a whole separate webinar because I feel so passionately about that training piece of it. But, you know, for this specific topic, something I've seen in the past, and maybe you can talk about how effective you've seen this, Dirk, but even if it's not as sophisticated as using a training program, but having your IT team email out to everybody else saying, here's one that we're seeing recently come up, you know, be aware of this if this is something that you see. You know, one I've seen a lot in the past at a previous job that actually caught a lot of people was a attachment that said fax. And it seemed like it was coming from, you know, an innocuous looking email address, and you think you're getting a fax. So you open up this attachment and it ends up being a phishing scam. A lot of people at a previous company I worked for sort of fell for that because it seemed so legitimate and seemed so innocuous. So we would get regular emails from our IT team to say, look, this is something that we're seeing a lot of, make sure, you know, even with screenshots to show what the attachment looked like. So people are aware that this is something that's coming in, that even if it looks legitimate, don't click on it. And I think, you know, that constant training, not just hit them once and kind of move on and hope everybody gets it, but that, you know, train them again, send the email, use the training programs you're mentioning here, you know, hit them from all angles because we're all human. We need to hear things more than once. So you know, be sure we're reiterating it as much as possible.
I think that's a great point. It's a culture of like almost, you don't want, maybe paranoia is the wrong word, but it's really a security conscious culture. And you're doing that in your team meetings, you're doing that, you know, like you said, maybe it's just somebody in IT who shares a link and says like, hey, I saw another study. I love that. That's a great idea.
Well, and it's not just up to IT. I think it's also important to, you know, share in these trainings is that if you see something, say something. If something looks suspicious, immediately forward it. Don't just assume that somebody else is going to do that or it's somebody else's, you know, job, if you will, to kind of look for those or be aware of them. Assume that they didn't receive it, that they don't know. And you know, if it gives you pause, forward it. There's no harm in, you know, just sending it and getting a response back like we're aware of it, we're on it, or, you know, it's okay to open. Just that peace of mind, because I have, you know, I've received emails that look suspicious and I clicked on them and then you like brace for impact. You're like, what just happened? Like, what did I do? Like I knew better. And so it's just really important to open up the floor and say, hey, look, these things, we're going to increasingly see this, you know, so see something, say something. It's everybody's business to share this amongst yourself and share it with our IT so that we can, you know, we can get ahead of it and make sure that it's safe. Because if we don't, you know, here's the training, explain the why behind it. This is going, you know, if you click on it, this is what they're looking for. And this is what it means to us. And not only is this what it means to us, but this is what it should mean to you. I have, I've received a letter in the mail where there was a, you know, a security breach through one of our local healthcare providers. And so it's not a great letter to receive in the mail when you have to monitor, they paid for a yearly subscription to have, my credit history monitored. That's not a good feeling to have as, as a client or as a patient or, somebody you put your trust into, a firm or a healthcare provider, whatever it may be. And we know these things happen. So it's just, what can we do to prevent those from happening to us? And so, I just wanted to, mention a couple of the see something, say something. And it's not just only specific to this, it's specific to a lot of other areas within your practice. But then really the impact goes of, what does this mean for our firm? What is the cost? How do we relay this to the clients? Imagine you getting that letter. So just really, get behind that training and get behind the why and all of it.
I think that's another really great point. And it's easy to kind of scapegoat somebody who clicks a link when they shouldn't, but that's everybody, right? Like I've done it, you've done it. I'll do it again probably. And so in that see something, say something culture, hopefully you're able to just say to somebody managing your IT, like, dude, I clicked a link. This may be bad. Can you check this out or something? Because the worst case would be like, oh, I'm feeling embarrassed. I don't want to tell them. It's probably nothing. And if it is something, then you are creating a bigger problem. And I'll tell you what, like that, if it is something, it'll get tracked back to you. It's pretty easy to find, who did the clicking. So I think that's great advice. So let's move into password stuff, because this is, I think, where everybody feels paranoid. Just some kind of, I don't know, they're fun statistics or interesting statistics. These did not come out of the data breach incident report from Verizon. These came from IBM's last year. So if you're trying to cross-reference some numbers, they might not match up, but still, I think, very interesting stats. So, hopefully you've been reading them kind of as we've been talking or noticing them. This is kind of a fun one. So we have so at Virtual Systems, we use some pretty big computers to support a lot of big clients. And we use some technology called GPU acceleration. So just the idea that you can make a computer do a lot, like, let's say, faster stuff than it's used to by adding some graphics power in there. That's what bad guys use to crack passwords. So, and there's some pretty interesting stats on there about why you want to have longer passwords. And maybe you're seeing some of the vendors you're used to working with telling you can't use, of course, like it's been out there for a while, you can't use the same password multiple times, but maybe, minimum characters in passwords. This is why, because there's plenty of black hat hackers who are using big supercomputers to crack passwords, and they do it very efficiently. So the other thing that you might want to keep in mind as you're thinking about your passwords is a password keeper. So we use at Virtual Systems, we use, what is that thing called?
LastPass?
I don't remember. LastPass, yes, Chip, thank you. Are you guys using that one too?
That's what we use, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we've had this conversation, but yeah, so good. Like, use whatever it is. LastPass is a great one, but whatever it is, use something. Have it keep your passwords, and it plugs into everything. If you're going out to a website, LastPass plugs in. So it's not like you have to go to LastPass and go look up that password and copy and paste it. LastPass is a plug-in that will just see that you're on that website, and it will say, hey, do you want to bring this password in? So the benefit of that is you can use like 20 character passwords that are all like, letters, numbers, whatever. You don't even have to know the password anymore because LastPass will spit that in there. So are you guys, any others that you're hearing of, Chip?
We use LastPass. Authy, I think, is another one out there. Yep. And then, just kind of in reference to the one point that you had on the previous slide that also ties into the multi-factor is, like, if you're reusing the same password in multiple places, it's probably breached already. So, like, I use a site, and you might know a better one, but Have I Been Pwned, basically? Have I Been PWNED.com?
Yeah.
If you go to that site, so Have I Ben PWNED.com. If you go in there and you pop in your email address, and I'll use like my personal email address, and I'll put it in there, and I'll click on the have you been phone, basically, have you been owned? You're going to find that yes, you have been. And so for my email address, I've been breached on 23 different sites, on Adobe, B2B, Business USA, collection number 1, data enrichment, exposure from PDL customer, Discuss, Dropbox, Experian, LinkedIn, Lookbook, Under Armour. I mean, like, these are very legitimate websites that got some information from my account because those websites were hacked. So even if my security is great, they got hacked. Somebody got my information, whether it's just my email address, personal information, or password. Like, it's out there. So if you haven't done it, populate your email address in that platform, and it's going to tell you, hey, this existed. Somebody got a hold of it. And here's what they got. So Adobe, they got email, username, email, encrypted password, and password hint in plain text. If you're using a password hint that is your password, they got it. And so some of these are worse than others, but like, at least you know, and you say, oh, okay, this got busted. Dropbox, if you have a Dropbox account, they got email addresses and actual passwords. So if you're using that same one in multiple places, it's out there. And unless you have multi-factor, then you have really, really very little control over that.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, and just know that on the dark web, that information is for sale all day. There are people selling thousands of passwords because it's human nature to repurpose your same password. I don't want to remember more than a couple, and if you think bad guys don't know that and they start plugging that same username and password into everywhere you do business, that's happening. So changing them on a regular basis is a great best practice.
How often would you suggest people change their password? And do you would you want to have the firm assign passwords, or have, individuals make their own passwords?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would recommend that you don't change your password. You use something like LastPass or a password keeper to do incredibly difficult, complex passwords. And then you don't have to change it quite as often. You could as a best practice, but you take that password hacking problem away if you do that. If you're just using super long, complex, because if you watch the stats that I referenced, where was that here? So this one, this password cracking tools can identify an 8-character. It's amazing. You go up 1 character and it's something like a week. And if you go to 11 characters, it's like 250 years for a supercomputer to try to crack your password. So if you use something long, it can't get cracked. And so I wouldn't do like, I don't know, spell out all your kids' names or something. That one will get cracked because the AI in the password cracking software starts with words, and usually it will collect all your information and start with any words that are specifically related to you. But then, the other thing I think to your question is, and where this slide goes, is use multi-factor authentication. If you don't know what that is, you're probably hearing about it, but here's what it is. You put in your username and password, and then that username and password credential gets routed through new software. In this case, we partner with Duo, but you can use any number of them, and it will go and ping your phone, your device, and it will say, hey, is this you? Somebody's getting in over here. Is this you? And then you click approve. So if somebody were to breach that same way, they would need both your username and password and your device on them, and they'd need to be able to unlock your device. So it really, we'll see some stats in a minute about how much it takes away, just in terms of how much it reduces your risk. But I think, yeah, great question. Does that answer the question, Carrie?
It does. It does. And I appreciate that, because I know, we leave so many to, change their own password whenever they're prompted to. And some, that could be years, and others it's a little bit more often that you're prompted to do that, whatever that setting is, or, whatever the website or what have you could be. But then it also leads me to think about this too, because I know when I set my own passwords, it's typically in some combination of things that I have, like for my banking account, or for, Etsy or something, Facebook, whatever it may be. They're different combinations, but, still some parallels there. So when what is your thoughts on saving passwords? Like sometimes if I log into, say Facebook, and it says, do you want to save your password for future use to reduce your times of having to sign in? I always say no. What are your thoughts on actually saving passwords? And, especially with working from home, where personal business, it shifts very quickly with, just kind of what we're doing. And then again, the parallels with our own passwords. Is that safe to do that, to save passwords like that?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think I would say it's safe-ish, probably. I don't love safe-ish. So if you've got a password keeper like LastPass, it will do the exact same thing. It will ask you. And so when I'm actually on my computer in the office, my browser asks me, Chrome is my browser that I use, and it will say that, and I say no. And then LastPass will ask me, and then I say yes. So I think you can get and LastPass and others like it are built for that. They're built to keep your password safe. Chrome is a plugin. I'm sure they're doing their part to keep information safe, but that's not really what their brand is built around. I would trust something that really has been built around keeping that information safe. So that's a great question.
LastPass plus multi-factor authentication, right? So for
sure.
for somebody to get into LastPass, first of all, it's very encrypted. You use a strong password in LastPass, then you use multi-factor. So then if somebody on a new device tries to break into your LastPass account where they have all your passwords, they would have multi-factor get in their way, even if they knew your complex password. So now you're remembering one complex password. And my understanding is that on the security side, the current recommendation is to not usually have an expiration date on passwords. You keep them, because if you have an expiration date, then you're going to resort to a system, and passwords are going to be too simple. They're not going to be complex enough. So use something like LastPass, and you don't have to remember that your password is X47 ampersand POQIOS caret.
Right.
Nobody's ever going to guess that. That's very secure. That's more secure than a long password that's easy to remember. So you do that, you store it in LastPass, you use multi-factor authentication, and it's very hard now for a bad actor to get a hold of that data.
Yep. And I would say it may be even a best practice if you're using like a bank or a vendor who's not doing MFA, ask them, bring it up, because I think it is a terrific best practice. And as computers get more powerful, password cracking is just going to be, I think more common. I see Robert, I see your comment in here about, he's using best practice 32 character passwords. I'm sure you're using a password keeper, because there's, it'd be difficult to remember those, but I think that's a great, keep them long, and use MFA and use a password keeper. So let me get into the next one. So this was kind of interesting. Microsoft put out a stat that said if you use an MFA, you can block almost every automated attack. So it's still, there's the bigger risk that I think is emerging is real targeted, specific attacks where people get to know your behavior. You're dealing with a person who's targeting you. AI is not quite smart enough to get there yet, so a lot of the attacks that we see are automated because they can do them in bulk, and somebody in that 10,000 group is going to click. So those are the most common right now. In MFA, it looks like Microsoft says you're blocking almost everything if you're using MFA. So it's a great best practice. So here's the next one. Think about when the last time was that you updated your computer. Hopefully that's an automated process for you. If it's not, then you might want to Google how to update your Windows computer or your Apple computer. So we pulled a stat from last year. In February last year, only about 15% of IT and cybersecurity professionals were figuring their company's updating and patching efforts were effective. So here's what happens. You run on your Windows computer, we'll say, and that thing needs to be updated usually every patch Tuesday. So Windows has, or Microsoft has, let's call it a holiday, every week where they send out patches and updates. Because all the time stuff is breaking on your operating system. Bad guys are figuring out loopholes, how to get in. And so Microsoft, it's an active, dynamic process where not just your operating system, but also your applications are constantly seeing updates pushed out to them. And hopefully that's happening automatically. But if it's not, I want to encourage you to think about making it automatic, or at least figuring out a strategy around that, because the longer your stuff sits out there and ages and doesn't get updated or patched, the more vulnerable it's going to be, right? That's pretty easy to think about, but
we see
I don't know,
that,
anything you guys want to add?
well, we see that on websites too, right? So, I mean, WordPress powers the bulk of the internet, right? And so
Yeah.
Your website can also get hacked, and maybe you don't have real sensitive information on there. Maybe it's more informational only, but when you don't keep your website up to date, and usually that's a combination of WordPress plus plugins. But we had a client, we have a client whose build is on Laravel, which is a different platform. Only they were on Laravel, I think 5, and we're up to Laravel 7. And so you can go in and you can find out, like, okay, what version am I on? And what we found out was Laravel 5 has known exploits. They were fixed in Laravel 6 and beyond, but we're up to 7 now. So in a situation like that, there's a lot of work to do that update. A WordPress install or something like that, it's not too hard, but it is also harder to automate. There are some tools out there that can help automate it, but if your site's out there and it's sitting there and you haven't touched it and it's been years, there are probably some vulnerabilities, because WordPress plugins, they have that same kind of update cycle. So it's not just your computer, not just those things. Because if someone can take over your site, they can create links, they can make you disappear in search because you're spamming links. They can capture other user information and then utilize that too. So if it's a piece of technology, if it's on a computer, then it probably has updates. If it's on the internet or if it's local, make sure you stay on top of it and keep it up to date.
Yeah, that's a great example.
And I want to say too, because I know that those notifications never come at the right time. So don't continue to hit snooze, or remind me tomorrow or whatever. And then tomorrow turns into a week or 2 weeks or whatever it may be, because you're working on something. So just make sure that, if you do get those notifications, that you're encouraging your team, do it, as soon as you possibly can. Don't, hit snooze or continue to put it off for days on end. And this is why. That's what I wanted to, I've been guilty of it myself one too many times, but again, I'm going to always, get to a stopping point, if you will, and make sure that those updates get done to try and decrease opportunities.
Or set it up.
I think that's, have it. And I think that's like, it's almost countercultural, because we're like an always on culture. It's like, don't stop, keep going, do it until, you gotta, like, my day feels like it stretches even now, especially with work remote. Like, I don't even know what time my work day starts and stops anymore. So it's countercultural for me to say, okay, I'm going to shut down my computer because I know I put an update on it. But make that a best practice too. Reset your computer. Like, anytime you call tier 1 tech support, what is the first thing they have you do? I don't care what it is, your phone, your software, the first thing they always have you do, power it off, power it back on. Like, let it do its thing. It's got to, sometimes that reset, it will apply patches, it will apply different tools if it downloaded stuff. So it's a great best practice. It's a great thought.
Well,
so here's another, go ahead, sorry.
I just want to say, and 2 is that I think a lot of my, in the beginning, pauses or hesitations with updating is that I was afraid it was going to mess something up, like, because then it may ask you questions as you go through the update, and how do you answer those? And so if it's something like that, maybe that's a training opportunity as well, to share with your team, be comfortable. This is what it looks like. These are the notifications. You click yes or no. So, just again, kind of falling back on training, because I think a lot of that, as we move forward, there'll be some more digital training, data security training to go on. So maybe share as much as that as you can. And again, that could be an IT send out. Hey, we started to see these, you should expect it. And these are the prompts, and this is how you should answer those to get through it.
Yeah. Yep. That's a great call.
And Dirk, I want to ask too, if you
go ahead. Yeah.
If a firm does get breached, and I had a firm recently that had a pretty horrific breach and lost a lot of data. Their data got corrupted and they were unable to get a good bit of it back. Do you have best practices that you would recommend for backups for firms who, you know, just want to make sure if the unthinkable happens, if I do have a breach, how do I make sure I'm able to recover as much as possible?
Yeah, I mean, that's a super good question, because I think that's the mentality you've got to have is you got to be thinking about how we keep our data available and redundant, because the primary data quite often is going to be compromised. If you go back to that quote or that mantra that we hear in information security, you know, assume breach, it's going to happen. So we do, you know, I don't want to make this too salesy, but we use at Virtual Systems, we use actually the biggest and best, according to Gartner, backup and disaster recovery software. It's called Veeam. It doesn't really, you know, talk less about the product and more about the solution. It just gives you a great, easy way to protect all your data, and really customize a backup strategy and a disaster recovery strategy to exactly the way you want to formulate it. And that's why we use it, because we've got a lot of different needs among a lot of different customers. So we can kind of tweak that tool to, let's say we want it to keep data forever. We can have it do that, or we want to replicate some data that's super important to the organization, and we want to replicate it in 2 different locations, just in case something happens in one location. In the event of breach, it's often we get a phone call from a client who says, hey, this thing happened, we can't do this anymore, we can't use this system anymore. And so we will, it's called rolling back, but we'll roll back to a backup. We'll go find the last known good state, is the terminology that you use. When was this actually working well? And then we just go back to that spot and we reboot everything at that spot and then operate moving forward. So then there's a process to remediate. So if we find the bad thing, we got to pull it out, get rid of it, and start and keep going from that last known good state. But so that's usually, I mean, I think we've got there is great software out there. You can Google, you know, backup software or disaster recovery software, and you'll have enough to do for weeks just researching what's out there. But I love Veeam. You don't have to buy it from us. You can buy it from anywhere. I would promote it all day. I just think they are not just a really good quality product, but they also, they were one of the fastest growing software providers over the last 10 years. I think they might have been the fastest. That record was previously held by VMware. And they've still maintained this like really good customer service. So easy to get a hold of people, easy to, you know, kind of spitball your problems and say, this is how we're shaped, how do we do this thing? They've got engineers for you. So really good solution. But there are others out there that I'm sure are also good. So yeah, good question.
We use it, and I think also a note is like, don't just assume that if you're using a cloud service that you're safe either. You know, Office 365, they can get breached. Their retention model is not long, and so you need a backup solution there too. So we're super happy with Veeam, and it just doesn't cost that much. You know, I mean, once you look at it, like unless you're backing up terabytes of data, it's inexpensive to back up your Office 365 or Google Apps. I'm less familiar with, but you know, the cost is just not that high, and you need to have it backed up. And your cloud accounts are not. They keep your data for a little bit, but it's a surprisingly short period of time. Yeah,
agreed. I think that's a really good point, Chip. The cost of some of those things, if you haven't shopped the market a bit in the last year, it keeps coming down. It's really, really manageable, I think. So, yep, good stuff. So what I was going to say, if you're feeling a little bit like, oh, this is getting overwhelming, there's so many things for me to do, I hope you're taking some notes and maybe coming away with some of that, but there are automated tools that will update and patch your stuff too. So I would encourage you to get with your technology providers, or we can help you have some of that conversation too. At Virtual Systems, we, if our customers opt into it, we will put software on their servers, on their computers, and that just does it all for us, so we don't have to think about it, and it will, you know, shoots us some analytics on it. Hey, this month we patched a bunch of stuff. Here's what it looks like. But you do have to be an active participant in that with your technology provider and with your team. So, all right. So here's the next one: vendor management issues. This is the one where we're looking at your network of companies that you do business with. We have kind of morphed, I think, into more of an outsourcing economy where we can let experts be experts, and we can bolt on these pieces of our organization to help us do, you know, a great thing. We use LaFleur for marketing stuff. They are terrific. But, you know, I also talk with Chip and about, you know, how are you guys doing some of this stuff, and what's your plan on that thing? And, you know, they see our data, LaFleur does. So the way they do business matters to me. And so, you know, I want to encourage that conversation with you and your network of businesses too. Do your due diligence, not just with technology partners, but with all your partners. Bring them back to the table. We mentioned at the beginning, like, they just went through COVID remote work stuff too. So it may have been, you know, crazy for them too. They may be changing policies. So bring them back to the table and ask them some of those questions. What are you guys seeing any, you know, best practices in terms of kind of that operational, like, all right, let's start over and just evaluate our relationships again?
Yeah, I think what we preach often, the importance of making sure you're doing your due diligence with all of your vendors. And I think particularly in the law firm space, there tends to be some, you know, everybody's using this, so I'm going to use this. And sometimes I think that can be a little bit of a dangerous mindset. You know, we're all different. We all have different needs. We all have different pain points. So, you know, as you're evaluating things like your accounting software and your case management software and all those other plugins that you have, all those other vendors that you work with, I think, you know, it can't be overstated how important it is to ask the right questions, to make sure that you're describing your unique needs, you're talking about your pain points, so you can make sure that you've got the right vendor, the right partnership for you, because it's not a one size fits all. And sometimes what that means to firms is I'm working with somebody who I'm very confident in their support department, because it's important for me to be able to call in and get good customer service. And for some people, it's, you know, I want to make sure I'm working with a vendor who is up on the most up-to-date security procedures. And so just making sure those questions come out when you have those both initial conversations and ongoing conversations with your vendors to make sure that those continue to be the best fit for you.
We have ongoing conversations, you know, with our vendors. We use data warehousing for some stuff, and we have conversations about what are your security practices, you know, what are your policies, what does it look like, how seriously do you take it? Then I also look out for red flags, and for me, those red flags, one of the biggest ones is if I have a vendor ask me for my credit card information over email, then I have a real serious conversation with them. And so we see that in the marketing world where we'll have a client, we'll say, hey, we need to get this information from you. Can we give you a call? And then, you know, if we get it over email or we have that conversation with them, first of all, we tell them don't send it over email. So usually we don't. But then we'll have a conversation with them and find out that, like, the company that they're working for that used to do their marketing would always just do that. So, like, that's a huge red flag. If you're working with an organization that says, hey, yeah, we're ready to go, send us your card information, then they're not practicing good security, like, period. And then that should necessitate an additional conversation. 'Cause I'll usually switch vendors if that's the case. If somebody asks me for a credit card information via email, I'll have a conversation with them first, but that tells me they're not taking it seriously. I don't want them to have control of my data, because if they're not taking that thing seriously, they're not taking other things seriously.
Sure. And, when we started to see, firms and businesses remote work, maybe your first or second choice to implement something wasn't available, just booked out, it was a month before they could get to it. So you just kind of went down the line, if you will, to find someone that could, at least do some patchwork. Can you just get us this? So make sure that when you are having those conversations that your needs are outlined, and those needs may have changed in the 3 months, from where we started and where we are now. Don't just rely on a phone call with a vendor and have them or partner and have them share what they know. They're going to hit all their high selling points. What are your needs? Identify those with your team, and then, or what you've been seeing along the way as maybe some red flags, and be ready to have that very candid conversation with them. Is this going to be the right fit moving forward? These are our needs. This is what you can offer. Do they align? Yes. Then we move forward, revisit it in, 6 months, 12 months, whatever that benchmark is for you. But, so that's kind of where we're at, and just saying, and that's where, again, we're doing as well. Those benchmarks are in place of, what do we have that we can consolidate? If there's individual subscriptions, and how, moving forward, what does this look like for us? as our team, not just, what we've heard and what's out there, but for us, what is going to be the best fit.
Yep, that's a great point. Keep the standard that you've got for your business, and don't be afraid to extend that standard to the businesses that you are working with too. So here's the last one. The fifth rated difficult security concern when it comes to remote work is just thinking about end user devices. This is really interesting. So, I mean, we used to just think about a computer, like you take your computer home or a laptop or whatever. And obviously, since we've got phones and now smart devices, currently, here's the stat, and I don't remember where we got this one from, but 8 network devices per person. That's expected to grow up to 13. So that just means that Internet of Things, connected refrigerators, microwave, whatever, like that is going to continue to grow. I think the stat is 4 devices that we personally use. So your phone, most people have like either a laptop or a tablet, a computer in the office, and then usually there's one more. So I think it's somewhere between 3 and 4 right now. So those are all hackable things. So here's kind of a cool story from 2017. There was a casino in Vegas, and they had cameras in their aquarium, and they got hacked. And bad guys could watch what was happening, and they could see spending habits in the casino, and they used that information to steal money. So if you think that folks are not getting creative with how to steal data, it's happening. So how we manage those end user devices, and maybe it's not as, maybe we don't have to be thinking about what security do we put on my financial officer's watch. That's not the big concern. The big concern is we got to at least be thinking about the devices where we're keeping data right now. So, and here's where some of the conversation goes. So what's a corporate device and what's a personal device in your organization? How are you protecting some of that stuff? Because if you're allowing your employees as a policy to see their business data on their personal device, then you care, or you should, about how they're protecting their data on that device. So what we want to encourage from this part of the conversation is really start thinking about some policies around protecting those end devices. Maybe it's just changing some internal policies and saying, hey, you can't use a personal device to access work stuff. Maybe it's new software that you're putting on end devices. So we use at Virtual Systems a cloud workspace model where we deliver it's a workspace in the cloud or in a data center, and you can access that from any device. But what it ensures is that if you're using an iPad at home to get into your cloud workspace and do your work, no data actually sits on that endpoint. So all we have to really think about protecting is the workspace itself. And there's some, I don't want to oversimplify it too much, but it does bring a lot of simplicity to some of that security and compliance model, because then we just focus our security and compliance strategy on the cloud environment, and you can just kind of, bolt or layer that stuff right in there. The other thing that I think is worth talking about is software that sits on end devices. So if you've got a lot of end devices out there, there's software. You could Google stuff like Unified Endpoint Management. That's the expensive term. What's MDM stand for? Multiple Device Management, something I don't remember, but that's another term for it. It's going to kill me. I'm going to keep trying to think about that for the rest of this webinar. But MDM or UEM are both really good ones to Google, but there's software you can put on end devices that will help you protect the data as it sits out there. So mobile device management, thanks Devin. Oops, I'm skipping ahead, but yeah, mobile device management, that's it. So Google those terms, find software out there that you can put on end devices, but develop those policies internally, because if we're working wherever, then the devices that we're working from matter. And as a business, you have to think about how are we protecting our information when it sits on employee devices. If we just as a policy said, okay, COVID hit, you've got a computer at home, great. Log into this place from that computer. Did you also ask your employees not to save their documents on that computer? Because if you didn't, you should. And if you did, that's okay. Install some software out there that protects it, because if they leave that laptop in a taxi cab and it doesn't have a password on it because it was theirs, and who cares, they don't need to put a password on their personal computer, then you lost a lot of data. So we just want to encourage you to have that conversation internally with your team and think about those softwares. It's easy to kind of layer that in. We do that at Virtual Systems. We had some really interesting conversations over the last couple of years about, well, this is my phone. I don't know if I want business software on the phone, but the software, you know what, is smart enough to know to separate your business stuff on your phone from your personal stuff on your phone, so it doesn't affect, you know, the personal stuff, but it does protect the data. And so I think, you know, I just want to encourage folks to be thinking about that and know that there's software out there to use. We use some VMware stuff, but there's lots out there that help you do that. So any insights that you guys have on some of that stuff for devices?
Yeah, I think this is where a good relationship between your human resources department and your IT department is probably really important. Because you have team members who leave, you know, under whatever circumstances those team members left, you want to make sure that one of the things you're looking at is cutting off their access to whatever they might have had on their personal devices, and cutting that off as soon as possible, especially if it's under circumstances that aren't ideal.
That's so true, Mary Ellen, because I was thinking about it too as your onboarding and offboarding plan. What does that checklist look like, so that you go through all of those to make sure that, you know, whatever devices are, you know, personal, business, whatever it is, that those are addressed either, you know, as they join the team, or, you know, as the exit strategy develops. So
yeah, and that gets to be almost unbearably complex pretty quickly too, you know. And so that's where like the virtual system solution of just saying like, look, we're going to sign into a portal, this is going to be the workspace. It starts to simplify some of that, you know. So it's something that we haven't bit off on that yet as an organization, but we're looking at it pretty closely, because I look at that management process of saying, okay, we've got people on LastPass, they've got this software, they're saving it to their desktop. Are we going to get the laptop or to the laptop? Are we going to get the laptop back or not? What if we don't? Then where does that go? Are they saving it to the cloud? Are they backing up their, you know, are they backing their desktop to the cloud? And if they're not, are they using that as a workspace? And then all of our backup solutions just go out the window, because now the laptop crashes, we lose the desktop, we lose files on the desktop, and how much work did they put into that? So you've got kind of a two-factor approach where you have the technology, but you also have the user. And like Dirk points out, like the problems come in more often than not from the user side, not even maliciously, right? But, you know, I've done the same thing. Hey, I'm working on this right now, I'm just gonna put it on my desktop. Well, if I'm not backing up my desktop to OneDrive, which, you know, I may not want to do, I lose the laptop, something goes wrong on it, all that work is now gone, right? So we turn on that syncing service, and, you know, a lot of people will use their laptop for in the opposite direction for personal things, and so they don't want to sync up the personal stuff there. But if you want to make sure your data is safe, and so that's why we're starting to look a little harder at the solution of, I don't even want my data to live on the endpoint at all. You know, I want it to be hosted in a server. I want to have control of that server, so that if we do make a big change, then not only do we have exponentially fewer endpoints where we could have a breach, but we have a lot stronger security on the workspace that they are working out of. We have real control over it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, Mary Ellen, your point too about just HR and IT talking, you know, you can develop really good policies, but you got to have technology that supports it, or you can develop really interesting technology strategies. But if you don't have a policy that says, hey, but don't download anything over here, then you still, you know, you can implement all the technology strategy in the world, and if your policy didn't line up, then you know, people can still do whatever they want. So I want to be cognizant of the time. Almost everybody has stuck with us, even though we've gone over a couple minutes, and appreciate that. If you got any other questions, plug them into the Q&A. We've had some good, I think, questions and dialogue on there so far, but that is really kind of the end of, so I hope you found some value in going over really the top 5 vulnerabilities and security concerns when we think about remote work, and just how to think about and solve those things. So here's the summary on, you know, what that looks like. But anything to add from the rest of the panel before we part ways?
We were on a call earlier today preparing for today's webinar, and Dirk, I brought up when I did some research on just data security and what was out there, and, you know, just really educating myself, if you will, more than I ever have in the past. But we talked about the opportunity of potentially hiring ethical hackers, if you will, to see
Oh, yeah.
where your points of vulnerability are. And so I just wanted to bring that up, you know, for firms. Maybe this is something that you're like, I think we're good, but we're not really sure. You know, there are those services out there. And so I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that. If it's something that certainly was new to me, I don't know if it's new to anybody else here on the webinar, but I would just like to get your quick thoughts on that, because I think it's really, I think it's really cool.
It is totally, right? Like this idea that you could hire people to try to breach your organization, and then they give you some really good reporting on it. And what I was telling you too, Terry, when we were talking earlier is you can limit it to your technology, or, you know, there are organizations that will try to get in the front door and steal stuff off your desk. And the conversation we were having is, well, you know, the front door has changed really so much in the last several months. It's not just the office front door. So yeah, there's certainly organizations that do that. I will say typically we see bigger organizations do it because it's not cheap. I mean, you really get a team of people, and we don't do it. Virtual Systems doesn't do it, but I did share with Terry that we actually lost an employee to go do that because that was like his dream job. He wants to hack and get paid for it. And it's a pretty cool job for somebody who, you know, geeks out on the tech and how to bypass, you know, even some of the best systems. And what you're really paying for is you know, a group's ability to do that. And so the expectation a lot from organizations is you better get in somehow. You better figure out how to steal our data because we want to know how to get better. And I think that might be the best takeaway of, you know, just the knowledge that stuff is out there. And I think the right posture towards cybersecurity is, you know, point out what we don't know, and help us get better on that thing. So yeah, there certainly are organizations who do that. And I think it's a good practice just to have that mindset and think, if somebody were going to do that with our organization, how would they steal our data? There's easy ways, you know, go ahead.
So some of those tools, didn't you mention some of those tools earlier on too, like the know before or something like that, where
yes.
it's going to do
know
some
before actually does that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like, that's easy. That's a cost. That's a few bucks per user every month, and they will try and do it through email. That's how they do it, and it's great. I mean, they will, you get automated emails, and they, you know, try to bait you into a number of different things, like, hey, your FedEx package is right here. Sorry, we couldn't leave it at your door. Click this link to see a picture of it, you know. Well, I mean, if I'm not looking very hard or thinking very hard, I'm definitely clicking that, you know. So, but it also gives you a training on here's what to look for in tricky emails. And so if, you know, what we have learned, and I think our security officer here, terrific guy, super paranoid about everything. I love him for the role he's in. He's really created that kind of paranoid security culture. And I do, every time I'm seeing emails in my box, I'm looking at exactly what that training program tells me to look for. So yeah, you can do it in a real light version. That's a great point, Chip. I didn't even think of that. Or you can do it in a heavy version where, you know, you actually pay a team of live people to spend 2 weeks trying to steal your data. And they do. They legitimately access it. You sign all the right paperwork that says they're not going to do anything with it, but they will legitimately get into your systems and then tell you how they did it. So it's pretty interesting, totally interesting stuff. So thanks for asking that. Any others that we can address before we go? I hope this was informative for everybody. So this webinar will be available as a recording. We'll send it out to everybody. You'll see the slide deck as well as walk through all this. If you think it's valuable, forward it out to anybody else in your organization. Hopefully it prompts some new conversations for you. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our team, the Vista team, the LaFleur team. We'd love to, even if it's just direct you to somebody else who can help you have some of those conversations, we'd love to do that. So anything else before we leave, you guys?
Been a pleasure.
Good job.
Thank you so much.
Good. All right. Well, thanks again for joining us. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. You too.
Bye, guys.